everyone. So welcome to our third paper making session in this series. I'm so excited to do this paper. Now this is going to be probably like our really first Blick dupe. This is a paper that one of our ladies in our community has sent to me, Yvonne. She gets it in Florida at her Blick there, I believe she told me that. I haven't found it at my Blick. I'm here in Arizona, but I know, there's different papers in different markets, but I absolutely love this paper. I used it in one of our mudlarkers, collages, and it's just great paper. So we're going to dupe this paper, and we can do it with some cocoa fiber that I got on Amazon, so I'll have the link for this, but you can go to any garden store. This is that kind of fiber that you put in the pots for plants and stuff like that. And we're going to be using our calligraphy paper, just as we've done before, as the base. So we're going to get working on this now, and let's have a lot of fun with this project. All right, so we're going to get started on the cocoa fiber paper that we're going to make our Blick dupe on here. We're going to be using the cocoa fiber, which I have the links for below. I've begun to shred it here, and I'll show more of this, but it's just kind of pulling these pieces apart. And then we're going to be using our calligraphy paper, which I'm going to go ahead and start putting in the blender. These were two sheets. The other thing that I want to tell you is that it's best to tear the paper. I know that I've shown you cutting it because I kind of just did it for expediency, but it doesn't really take much more to tear it. And if you tear the paper, you keep the fibers in their natural kind of longer state, which is better for handmade paper because they overlap. The fibers kind of like overlap, like my fingers are doing when they lay down, and when you cut through them, you actually cut and put a blunt end on the fibers, and it works, of course, but ideally tearing the paper is a bit better than cutting it. So I just wanted to tell you that. But if you can't tear it, if it's easier for you to cut it, you can still cut it, but I wanted you to know what the differences would be. So let's go ahead and get this going. Okay, so we have a nice mixture here, and I already have some water in here, and this again is 1 1/4 liters, or about 5 cups. I might add some more fiber, but the thing with this paper is we don't need a lot of fiber. As you can see through it. What we're really going for is a mixture that's going to help hold all of this fiber together and some pulp. So that's why we don't really need a lot of, this is going to pull a decent sheet of paper, you can see right there. But I'm more interested in us getting this fiber down. So the way I'm going to tear the fiber, just so you can see, it tears easily. So you want to tear a piece, and then you want to split it because it just pulls open nicely. And I'm going to play with doing it a couple of different ways. I'm not even sure exactly how I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to play with either putting some in the pulp here and just kind of making it really thin, so there's some already in the pulp. And I'm also going to play with the idea of just kind of keeping it together like this, kind of pulling it apart. So you can sort of see how we're starting to see through it, like the way that paper is. So just kind of take your time and sort of pull it apart. So we're starting to get something that's looking like that. See how we can see through it? Okay, so now let's take our mold, making sure that we get the top part of it. The deeper edge, the recessed area is the back, and the thinner or non-recessed area, or it's only like 1/8 of an inch or something, is the top of your mold. So let's go ahead and get a very thin scoop. I'm actually just going to kind of pick up pieces like that because I really want this very thin. You can see how my hand, you can pretty much see my hand through it. We want a very, very thin layer to do this cocoa fiber paper. So so we're going to take a piece of this fiber, and then we're going to take it, we're going to lay it on our mold. And just, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of pressing it down a little bit so that, you know, it's kind of like on the frame. And then we're going to start scooping the pulp material over top. And there's a lot of ways to do this paper. I'm sure this is kind of like a beginner technique because we're not using additives. So we're not using additives that would make the paper stiffer or stronger. It's almost kind of like a glue-like substance they probably have used in this original paper just to give it that kind of wispiness, but the strength. There's also additives for colors so that your colors actually adhere to the fiber and they just don't float into the water. In the beginning stages of paper making, it's just a lot of, it's too many extra supplies between mordants and color agents and stiffening agents and all that stuff. So, you know, as we kind of go along, and when I ultimately do more of a master class in paper making, we'll get into that. But to have fun with this and to be able to do this, you know, in your home studios, you really don't need to do all that. It's just a proper selection of papers. And the techniques I'm showing you are going to get you there without all of the other stuff. So this way right here, you can see where it's pretty well sandwiched in there. So we're going to let the rest of that water drip off. And we're going to take, and we're going to couch it right here like we normally do. And then let's use our sponge to help with the release. And we just want to snap it, get it out like that. And so you can see where you can see that back sheet and then the fibers are locked in there. So I'm gonna put that over out the way so we can dry. And I'm gonna show you another way that we can do this. And we can do this by actually kind of doing the inclusion technique. Hello everyone, and happy Saturday. And here we are again, sitting at my desk, just going over, you know, the cards that we've already made and just being inspired by this week's session. Boy, I really enjoyed this. I feel like I'm also loosening up and becoming maybe a little bit more abstract and a little bit more sort of thinking about this idea of these inspiration decks even more broadly. So I'm finding that, like, I feel like this week's session is even more kind of like brings all of the different styles that I love and the very genres that I love together, because I love collage, I love antique ephemera, I love found objects, I love making my own papers and, you know, mark making and DIY papers, and now we've really gone head in on handmade papers. In this week's session we are making this paper here, which is very similar to the paper, the DIY Blick paper that we're making, and you guys are seeing that in the section where I'm showing how to do this particular paper style. And we've been able to work it back into both of these collages, which I love. So it's like the best of everything. And then my Asian ephemera, a lot of my Asian stamps and chops are being used. So it really, this really reminds me sort of a fisherman, you know, even sort of like an Asian, you know, sort of fisherman's village, you know, found objects, accumulation of, you know, those aesthetics. I just love it. This is also using my stamps, which is organic triangles, and this is an off print using our our fountain pen inks, and just, oh, I love it. So let's get started. So in the first one, I started by, well, actually I did them at the same time, right? I activated both surfaces because I knew I was going to do 2 cards, and I kind of wanted them to flow together. So I activated both surfaces using my Posca pen. So I used a gold, I used white over top of it, and then I came back with the black Posca on this one. Because as I started working with these elements, I decided I really wanted to kind of lay and see a little bit more of the scripting. So, you know, just taking a paper and simply taking the Posca pens and marking on them, and then over marking on them, and then over marking on them, you make a really cool you know, mark making decorative paper. And I probably should just do a session where we just play around with that, because the combinations are endless. So on this one we use the gold and the white, and at first I really thought I was going to cover most of the page with this stained paper, but once I got the mark making down, I really liked seeing it, so it caused me to rip this piece down to expose a little bit more of the mark making, but still keeping this paper central to the design of this collage. I also knew that I wanted to use this paper that we had made with the cocoa fiber and the handmade paper, and I really felt that these blended nicely. You know, that sort of very organic, found object, just an aged look. And this is all with new materials. So we're making our own papers, we're making our own materials, and yet it still has this aged, could have found this, you know, somewhere look to it, which I really like, that authenticity. So once I figured that out, put that down, I knew that I wanted to use this found object. Now this is off of an old bottle. It's sort of like a seal that was on an older bottle. So I had saved this from a while ago, because, you know, our found objects, and I really like the idea of it, the combination of it. I like the oval and the knots and this sort of broken wax seal element. And I knew that I kind of wanted to put that down, so I experimented with some placing, but really liked it there. And so with that lined up, I felt that this outer edge still needed something. The handmade paper was there, but it needed another element. And I had this silk fabric that I had eco-stained a while back using avocado pits and skins, and you get this really nice organic, any of those of you have stained with avocado, you get this really pink, organic, sort of dusty rose color. Not at all what you would expect from avocados the first time you use them, but it's the best color, and you get that color on paper and on fabric. So I ripped a little bit of that, and I felt that it worked perfectly over top of the handmade paper, and also it blended in nicely with the color of the organic triangles. I like this ink blot, so I definitely wanted to keep a bit of that. You know, we have to have that sort of ink blotty, you know, just really random kind of feeling that ink blots bring in. And then with everything laid out, I really liked it. I decided to use the Tim Holtz tiny stapler, and even though I glued this down, it was something about adding a couple of staple elements that I really liked. They're very subtle, but I don't know, I just like that effect of that sort of the feeling that maybe this was stapled on versus, you know, so the idea of the PVA being a permanent glue. And that's what I did use as a PVA, because I know that's a really strong, good permanent glue, and it will cause things that are pretty heavy to really stay in place. Once I used the PVA over here, I did decide to come back and staple it. I put a staple there and a staple there. Not only did I want to really retain the oval, I didn't want to glue it all down, because I like the free edge of things. And since I'd already used a staple here, it, you know, it worked out. Now I could come back and I may, when I go back to use thread and stitching on these cards, I could come back and overstitch the staples with embroidery floss or whatever, you know, threads I'm going to use. So keep that in mind too. Even if you use the tiny staple to hold something in place, you can come back and totally, you know, cancel it out by using the stitching over it. You could stitch at the same time, but I find that the staples hold things in place. So I get the shape that I want, and then it's easier to come back and put the stitches where I want than trying to stitch it and hold the shape while I'm stitching it. I just find that it's a little difficult for me. And then with all of that done, this side of the page was open, and I felt like I wanted something to close it off to kind of bring the eye back into the middle of what's going on. So I had this piece of vintage paper. You know, I'm working from just a lot of pieces that I have. These are like my spare pieces to use in collaging. So I always keep those, you know, around, and then I find the pieces that I want and pinch off of them. So I think this came off of a piece like this. So it's just getting a roll. It's nice and translucent. You can sort of see it's a nice, you know, thin paper. So putting that down on this edge, I really feel that it brought the eye back in, and it really just created a nice foundation to this collage, and it gave another calligraphic element that I had already started at the beginning using my scripting with the Posca pens. So, you know, it's this really subtle juxtaposition of script and calligraphy, and I just love it. And this gold pen really acts as a little bit of, it gives a little bit of, it's not overly glittery or, you know, metallic, but it gives a nice subtle metallics, and it always blends in nicely with these oatmeal and very organic stained colors. And I really like that color of the Posca pen in the gold. And it's just a gold one. I don't have one here on the desk with me, but it doesn't, I don't really believe it says anything else but a gold. So I make sure I put a link below. But anyway, love this card. So then picking the next one up, you know, I had stopped both of them at the time with the gold and then the white Posca. I had pulled this piece out from my stash that I'd done a long time ago. I mean, this is out of my stash of like several years ago, where I had taken some cheesecloth and I put gold paint on it. And so it's really, you can see it has like a nice stiffness to it. It moves, but it still is like stiff. And I laid that on top, and I really liked it over the scripting. But I also wanted to see a little bit more script, so I came back with the black Posca and just over scripted, just so that when we're looking at it, you get, you know, you just see the black line work there. And I think that the idea of coming with the black calligraphy in this card gave that same kind of concept here that I got here by applying the Posca. So we got similar effects two different ways, and that's another way to think about collage, is how can you repeat effects but you're doing them differently. So always think about that, and when that happens, you know, make a note to self, you know, like of the different ways that you can use collage medium and techniques to get similar effects but differently. And that's something that I pay a lot of attention to, and that's something that I talk about in my collage, you know, workshop and courses, is like all the different techniques that we can think about to create similar effects. And that's what causes your work to have diversity. It won't be boring. You know, you can get similar things said differently, so the eye just will keep on traveling around the work that you're doing. And especially when you're doing a series, it's so important to figure out different techniques to create similar dialogues, but that won't be boring. So really like that. So when I laid this down, I clearly didn't want to glue it, so I definitely pulled out the tiny stapler for that. And you barely can see the staples, but there's one there, there's one down here. So, you know, I put them in a few places down here. That's what I love about, I think one of the most brilliant things that comes out of Tim Holtz's collection of materials, and he has a lot of them, but that tiny stapler got me. I just love it, and I use it a lot. Can't recommend it enough. So it can be a little pricey. I mean, as a stapler goes, it might be $15, $16, but when you get it, also comes with a whole box of staples, so it lasts a pretty good time. And then when you need to get more, I think there might be like 5,000 or something like that in a little box. It's like $5 or something like that. So I've used this quite a bit, and I think I'm only on my second box of staplers, and I've had it for 3 years now or something like that. So it really is, you know, cost per use, it's a really good deal. So for those of you who might have been a little on the fence about it, and I'll make sure that I have a link down below for it as well, and you're like, oh, you know, $15 for a staple or whatever it is, you know, it is really good for it. So if you're, you know, if you're not interested in it, you know, don't even think anymore about it. But if you've been on the fence, because I was on the fence a while, I'm gonna tell you, I really am glad I did it. So I know that I wanted to go with this more salmon-y color. And you know, I show how I've made this one in other, well, in Patreon, because we continued to work from, you know, working with the cream color, and this was a series of processes that I, you know, got to get this, but it's just, you know, working with a color pulp. But I still did the exact same techniques, still used the same coconut fiber. Everything was the same, except for it was a different pulp base that I put that in. I really liked it laying on top, and it has this really fisherman's reef, you know, caught in a net type of concept or something. Now I started off with this green piece of beach glass that I found at my when I did the local mudlarking that I showed you guys weeks back. I found that little piece of green glass and I liked it, and you know, it reminds you of beach glass, even though I found this at a lake, etc. So it's not quite as tumbled. So this whole card started with this piece, just like this whole card started with that piece. You know, the idea, because we're doing mudlarker inspiration cards, and we're starting with this place of found objects, I'm always using the found object to start the process. So we did start with this, and then everything else fell into place in terms of the colors. Even this gold from the Posca does have, like, it's a greeny gold, so this green of the glass really works in nicely with that. And even the patina of the gold paint, sort of having patinaed over a few years, it's kind of that greeny gold. So all of this is working together really nicely. I really love it. And so the green glass was put down with the PVA, and you can see how nicely it dries. You know, even though it's squished out around the side, it dries beautifully. You don't even see it, which is I love about the PVA. I used staples to put this on, so I think I actually put them together, right, and stapled them all at the same time. And then I had this empty space up there. I wanted to do something with it. I didn't want to distract. I wanted it to blend in. And here again, taking a piece of this vintage paper, which was the theme, I got the steel cream and black calligraphy thing going on here, which really mirrors what we have here, and it also mirrors what was going on here. So, you know, like, these cards work together beautifully as a unit because I'm repeating the concepts, but I'm not using the exact same papers or the exact same technique. I had this corner open up there, and I wanted to do something. So I pulled out my chops and my stamps, and using actually stamp pads, I stamped this on there first. Really liked that really orangey red color of the stamp pad. That color is called Sunset. For those of you who are familiar with those stamp pads, they were actually gifted to me, but I think they're a part of a whole collection of products that that company only sells directly. I've never found them on Amazon or any place like that, so I will see if I can see them. I've looked before and never found them, but for those of you who may already have that collection, because I know a lot of people who follow people on YouTube who sell those products may have them. This color is Sunset, so just so you know. But any sort of orangey red color works. And then I have these ivory chops that are vintage, and some of them were excuse me, were gifted to me, And others I found at auction, I think on eBay. But using those same inks, I picked very subtle colors. So this color, I think, was called Bamboo. It's kind of hard to see it. It's very subtle, but to the eye, you can really see it, and you can see the chop itself, and I liked that. And then the gray on top of it I put was something I like. I think that color was Slate. And there again, it was just a really beautiful gray. So you get this really subtle look of the stamps. You know, you want an aged, a worn look. So yeah, I could have gotten black or brown or a stronger color, but I wanted very subtle colors. So it sort of gives this feeling of the stamps haven't been there for a while, and they're kind of fading out because you can see them really clearly, but they look a bit faded, and I liked that look. So it really gave that kind of delicate look to stamping, so it doesn't all look like stamp, 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 all the same color and intensity. And that's also important to use, to think about those things when you're collaging and you're creating things that you want to have a vintage or an old world or a worn look. You know, what we love in our community here, think about the shades and tones of the colors that you use so that they're not all on the same tonal scale. You know, so everything isn't like a bright or a strong hued. You know, you want things that are maybe more gray or further down the tonal scale towards white in terms of color ranges, and some may be stronger towards black, you know, in terms of it. And I think it's this push and pull between this black being at one end of the tonal scale, so it's at the black end of it, right? And then these right here are further down the tonal scale, closer to white. And this is where you get the juxtaposition. And then we actually have white there from our Posca. So we really kind of bridge the gap. And so everything on the cards are not one tonal color. And that's another important thing to think about when you're really thinking about collage and making things interesting and having things interesting to the eye, is think about that black, white, that gray scale. You know, we all have seen them, black at one end, white at the other, and you have grays in the middle. You know, you might want to take a chance to look at that, and maybe I'll try to pop it up on the screen, because I think it's a really cool concept to really think about the gray scales when in your work. Now, in terms of the gray scale, that being said, you can take any color and apply it to the gray scale. So let's say, for instance, red. So we can have red at the one end where the black is, and then we can have a very light pink, almost a white on this other end. And then in the middle, or you could actually have it being a white on this end. And then in the middle, everything in the middle works towards adding a little bit more white or a little bit less red, depending on which side you're coming from. And so then you'd get all these tonal qualities for red. So you can do that with any color. But when you want to think about creating interest in your work, a lot of times I'll see people who really like one color, let's say like purple, and everything will be that same strength. Or it may be a really strong purple, and then maybe it might be a lilac, and maybe a little periwinkle that has a little more blue in it, and that's it. And they don't oftentimes think about all the colors that would come with that one strong purple with a white. So, you know, maybe that's the tip of the day, you know, thinking about your colors in tonal ranges so that you can really bring a lot of interest to your collage work. And I think that would wrap it up today, you know, talking about what I did here and really thinking in terms of trying to share with you my methodology, because though our focus is mudlarkers, just like our previous series, it was about Cabinet of Curiosities, we're still working on the ideas and concepts of collage, also controlling our product, so it's making our own mark making papers. And now I'm teaching you how to make handmade papers so you could really control, you know, the art that's coming out of your studio and what you're producing, and how you can really feel proud of it. Like, you can do a card like this and you can say, oh, I made the background paper, oh yeah, I made this paper, oh yeah, you know, it's like the idea of really owning your art. And then because we're using collage as a main media, and you know, collage is actually considered a fine art media. I find a lot of people think collage is just some kind of craft, or, you know, but it actually is a fine art medium. So, you know, like, you really can press and push the concepts of collage in your work and feel good about the fact that, you know, it is a collected, It's exhibited in museums. You know, major artists use it. So it, you know, it's a viable genre to really understand and push further. So with that said, thank you guys for joining me here today. Love you guys so much. I've enjoyed chatting it up in Premiere, as we always do. And yeah, just continue to work on your handmade paper techniques and any of the other techniques I've been showing you. Add them together in your work, and you know, make sure that you, once again, that you hit the bell that you liked and enjoyed this. And if you're new, once again, hit the bell and hit all so that you'll get all my notifications. And other than that, you know, happy creating. I look forward to seeing you next Saturday for another technique. And until then, so much love from my studio to yours. Take care. Bye-bye now.